So I want to talk about fatigue and depression in relation to going through acute periods of stress, right? And the question for me is, why is depression generally assumed if you're going through a longer period of feeling gloomy, fatigued, brain fog, unmotivated? Why is depression assumed? And is it an unrealistic expectation to think that we can go through an acute period of stress and not need an acute period of rest to recover from that? And so I want to share my experience with that and how I learnt about these things. If I rewind, I was going through a pretty, hard time where I was feeling constantly fatigued. So I'd wake up after a sleep, and then an hour later, I'd need to have another nap. And I was feeling constantly, brain fogged, weakness, lethargy, not the type of tiredness that you feel after a big night, but just exhaustion and sleepiness, almost like where I felt drugged, right? And then my resistance to that, because I felt like there was something wrong, is what triggered anxiety, right? So there was this back and forth of, I'd feel the wash of fatigue, right? At times where I just couldn't be fatigued. That could be like, before going on stage, or when I'm going about my day at work, right? And so then I would resist that. I'd try to push through it, and then that's when the anxiety would kick in. So an example of my day, back then would be wake up, feel okay when I would, open my eyes, but then an hour later, I'd need to have a nap, right? So maybe I'd have a 20-minute meditate before going to work. Actually, this is before I was educated on it, so I'd try and push through it, right? So that would be my first, hit of anxiety. Then I'd get to work and I'd feel, lethargic again and brain fog and have to, walk outside. I would need naps after going for a walk. Just as far as brain fog, the brain fog would be so full on that sometimes I'd feel just confused and almost where everything felt really surreal. And that was pretty much my day. And because of the anxiety, because of my anxious responses to that, I was kind of on this roller coaster of like fear and dread and fatigue, that would then keep me up at night because I would then be anxious about feeling that way the next day. Yeah. So that was kind of my day in general. And it took me some time, but I ended up finding some practitioners to help me address a lot of these problems. And rather than trying to remedy the fatigue itself, they were going to work to identify the causes of these problems, right? By trying to track down, the energy leaks. Where are the energy leaks? What's causing, all this weight to be on my body and on my mind? So there were physiological reasons and there are psychological reasons, right? So the more that they uncovered, and the more that I learned, I realized that I had just come off the back of 6 years of just running flat stick, foot on the floor through life. I'd just come off the back of 6 years of running life, on stress hormones essentially. And so, to just give you a bit of an overview of what that was like, at the very start of it, I was, I'd broken up with my girlfriend at the time and then met my now wife. So that relationship shift was quite a stress. Not so long after that, my wife became the primary carer for her mum, who was going through cancer. So then I was the support for Amy while she was trying to help her mum. Her mum lost her battle. So then I was the Amy didn't really have any family around to support her after that. So I was the primary support for her while she was grieving. And that was for years. So there was generally quite a heaviness in the air at home. I'd lost both of my grandparents. I'd lost 2 friends to suicide. I was also trying to run a band that I was in, Nat Cole and the Kings, and I was managing that whilst touring it. I had changed jobs from being a brickies labourer, where I'm sort of living at home, like where I grew up, quite freely, to then having a full-time job here as a screen composer and trying to, service a mortgage. And, I had zero respect for sleep, because for me, I was just so enthusiastic about life that for me, sleep was just a waste of fucking time. So it would be quite common for me to be, finish an 8-hour day at work and then, be up till 1-2 o'clock in the morning, producing another act at the time, or my own stuff, or writing, or whatever it was. Complete disrespect to then the day that I had, another massive day in the studio, even touring. I never really took days off to recover from tour. So I'd work full time throughout the week, then jump in the tour bus. We'd drive all the way to Queensland, 10 hours, do 3 gigs there. I'd be up after every gig having beers and getting on it, and have 3-4 hours sleep, and then drive home and then get back into my full-time job again. So I was kind of running like that for a good 5 years, right? And I remember the time that my body went from attacking life to retreating from life. And it was just before I got married, because there was a lot of conflict around, around the wedding. It was a sensitive time for everybody that was involved. But there was so much conflict, and I just felt so much pressure, and I remember the feeling in my body and my mind. It was almost like, it was like a switch, where I went from, all the cells in my body went from, attack and lean into life to just checking out. And that became my default state. Any tiny little bit of stress, it would trigger me on almost what felt like on a cellular level, deep within my body. And I'd respond with fatigue and anxiety. And the more I became educated by my practitioners on what's happening in the body when you are operating like that for a long period of time, then I started to realize, why wouldn't I need a long period of rest after going through all of that? Why do I think that I can just solve this problem and recover after a 2-week holiday? So I had to make some serious changes in my life to be able to recover. So firstly, they're going to work on making sure, or trying to identify the things that are currently zapping my energy, right? So as I mentioned before, it was gut health, there was biochemical reasons, and there was also psychological reasons. So my practitioners are going to work helping me to identify those and change them. But then I had to make some quite drastic adjustments to my life. And I had no problems doing that after understanding the fact that, all right, I have been operating a certain way. I've been literally running on stress hormones for years. And so then my day became about respecting my body, not demonizing the fatigue. As the fatigue surfaces, right, and washes over me, I would see that as a cue, not something to plow through. It's like an engine light on a dashboard. If you're looking at the engine, if the engine light on your dashboard is flashing, you're going to want to pull over and work it out, right? So I had to give up, martial arts, all the high intensity training. I'd been doing that since I was like 12 years old. That was a hard decision to make. But I wasn't feeling good doing it anyway. So I'd wake up in the morning, and the first thing I'd do was meditate and set the intention low and slow. This is not a time for high production and pumping and plowing through life. This is a time to respect the fatigue and just cruise, right? So meditation, when I'm moving my body, For exercise, it wasn't about high intensity training. It was about just, mobility, just moving the body, yoga, going for nice walks, not high intensity walks. And I had to also respect that my stress threshold was much lower as well. So it wouldn't take me much for my heart to start racing or stress hormones to be triggered. So it really meant, cruise. Even walking into the studio here, I always had a sort of like, let's fucking smash it, I think that comes from my days as a brickies labourer. And even that in itself is wasting energy. So just walking into work, taking advantage of all those pause moments that I was talking to you guys about before is each time there's a channel change in the day, just stop for 60 seconds to get present and bring your nervous system and your energy down, right? So I'm walking into the studio, even when I'm talking, there's probably a degree of adrenaline right now, and I wouldn't normally be talking like this back then. Cruise. When I'm going about my day, composing or whatever, cruise again. What I discovered is that doesn't make me less productive. I had some of my most productive times were while I was in that mind frame. So it did show me that, pump and high energy doesn't necessarily mean good quality work. So that was my day when, I remember going over to my parents' place and, we'd be having dinner and I'd feel it wash over me again. So I'd go to the other room and just take 15 minutes and lie on my back and then I'd come good. Socializing, the way that I socialized changed as well. No longer was I up till 1-2 o'clock in the morning getting shit-faced. I had to choose my, the times that I wanted to be social wisely. I really need to respect my body and what it was asking for. And at the same time, my practitioners have got a great foundation to be able to sort out what the ongoing causes of my energy leaks were. And bit by bit, they were like light switches, on. And with a bit of time and consistency, I had my old energy back. Not only did I have my old energy back, but I learned so much about myself that life is better for it. I live a much better life than what I did before I had these problems. And it really did make me wonder how many times depression is used as the default, as a default diagnosis. When you've, say for my wife, she went through a fair few years of looking after her mum and then grieving, and I that's a time for her to rest and heal and process all those emotions, not just try and work out the quickest way to get back to life. I think that way about, even women who after pregnancy, you just fucking built a human being in your body. Psychologically and biologically, that is an incredible thing, probably one of the biggest things you'll ever do in your life. And to expect that you can just be back to work straight away and have, everything be firing and, on all cylinders. I mean, there's a fantastic book by actually one of my practitioners that helped me through this, Dr. Oscar Serralach, who wrote a book, Postnatal Depletion. And I love that word. I love that he changed that word, postnatal depression, to postnatal depletion, because depression implies a certain type of treatment, but depletion for me connects you with what's actually going on in the body and the mind. And so that's what I how I view and the practitioners that I've worked with view anything when you're going through long periods of stress. I mean, when you think of some of the top 5, stresses in life, whether it's moving house, losing a loved one, losing a job transitions, a relationship shift, and it doesn't even have to be that. The Gabor Mate talks about trauma, that it doesn't have to, on the outside, be traumatic. It's what it feels for you on the inside. So if you reflect on your last year or two and go, I'm wired, and there's no real reason to be wired, it's beside the point. You have been wired for that long, that amount of time. And I would also assume that after we get through this, what we're all going through together with COVID, I mean, this has been a time where I think a lot of our, foundations and pillars of life have been rocked. The feeling of safety, where we're feeling, that some of our lives are under threat, and our livelihood, our houses, whatever it is, our businesses. I mean, it's a stressful time. It hasn't just been a stressful time for a month. It's been a stressful time for a year and a half plus. So I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of this, some of us go through a period where we're feeling so unmotivated and gloomy and lethargic and tired, and if you do go through that, just remember what you've been through. Most of my friends who I talk to that have gone through depression or, chronic fatigue or whatever, it's generally off the back of a really stressful period in their life. And to me, giving your body what it needs is respecting the fact that you are human, you're not a robot. And when I began to accept those periods of time where I am just fatigued and unmotivated, I was able to move through them much quicker. The body is communicating with you. And so that's all I have to say about that one. I think probably the biggest point is in how we perceive fatigue and all its kind of moody cousins. Is there really something wrong, or is it just part of being human? And respecting it and accepting it is how we move through it and learn. I mean, I'm stoked that I learned all those lessons and that I went through that. Because I'm not going to live like that again on those stress hormones. I understand the cues now. I feel like I'm more productive. And it's just give yourself a break. Don't be like, hey, I've just taken 2 weeks off, so I should be fucking fine. No, not necessarily. Nobody until I met these practitioners ever told me that. They never told me that, the body does sometimes need a longer period to recover. And I think what can kind of keep us stuck in that anxious, depressive cycle is because we think that there's something wrong when there's not. Your body's working just fine.